Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from the world of technology from Bangalore, India, Shreya Krishnan. Shreya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you. Shreya is the managing director of AnitaB.org India. She's the winner of Miss Universal Empowerment 2024, a former corporate diva, and Mrs. India Universe in 2017. And she's an author. She's an author of a book titled Words Matter, The Language That Girls Need to Speak. So, Shreya, before we talk about AnitaB and advancing gender diversity, tell me about your own journey in brief.
I started with being an environmental sciences student. I wanted to work in sustainability. Somewhere I wanted the whole idea of, the environmental journalist intersection to be my career path. And that's where I started. And I started, my first job was at the Hindu. I was a journalist there. So I studied both environmental sciences and journalism. Somewhere I was also the cultural secretary, so got caught into all of the things that happens with events, got pulled into events as a career initially. And marketing happened to be one of the things I sort of got roped into because I had a way with words and writing, and I was a poet already. And so segued into marketing. Spent the last 17 years of my career in marketing, CSR, DEI, all of the adjacent things around it, around communications and all of that. Previously, I was with Aon. I was helping Aon sort of transition into India from Unditaken to becoming Aon, and then, the whole 9 yards of all of the Aon's businesses, etc. I was on the advisory board of AnitaB last year, and 2 months in, they said, would you consider sort of taking this on? And DEI is something that's very close to my heart. It's been something that I've worked in. My book is also an attempt at sort of bringing some of the consciousness towards language. So I think I found great intersection of purpose and alignment in career. And at this stage, I'm really enjoying building and doing the work that we're doing here in India.
Incredible. And as they've often said, if your passion becomes your profession, then there's nothing better that you can hope for. And you seem to be living the dream, if I can use that term.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's immense privilege, and I'm very grateful.
Fantastic. And more power to you. So, Shreya, let's now talk about gender diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. Can you share some of the key initiatives AnitaB has undertaken to advance gender diversity in the tech industry?
So when you look at gender diversity currently in the tech industry, especially when it comes to women and minority genders like the LGBTQIA, transgender, inclusion, etc., the number of women at the workplace is at around 29% at the early start. Then it diminishes and dwindles down to around 14%. And then further up the ladder, as you look at leadership levels, it drops down to 8%, 2%, depending on the kind of industry, whether you're tech or tech adjacent. And there is a problem with that because the world is not essentially designed to be inclusive. And the more our workplaces look like the societies that we currently occupy, the more problematic the world of business becomes, because it does alienate voices. It does remove people who are on the fringes, who are not often seen or heard. And that is problematic because it's not an inclusive world then. And if it's not inclusive, it's also not sustainable. And they're all connected, right? Diversity is connected to inclusion, is connected to environment, is connected to societal governance. So ESG and DEI somehow are very deeply interlaced. And the more representation that we see, the more equitable workplaces become, the more balanced, business profits, etc., become. There's enough research to show having diverse teams, having inclusive teams gets you better products and services, and it caters to a larger market, and there is profitability there, and there is money on the table. So the question is, do you really want to leave that money on the table? So it's about advancing really and creating spaces, workplaces that are firstly safe. We have to address safety. We have been talking about workplace safety, and the skew is always to putting the responsibility and accountability of a woman's safety on her. And, we're not helping by policing or protecting. We really need to create safe, equitable workplaces. And by that, I mean workplaces where there is equal opportunity, where you have a seat at the table, you're being heard, where your opinion makes a difference and is valued, where your career advancement is not a struggle, where you're not called a diversity hire. You can see that's happening on the world platform currently, right? So really eliminating inequities at workplaces, creating safe workplaces, creating financial inclusion and independence. And we also focus on pay parity and equity in terms of the constructs and structures that exist. With the LGBTQIA communities and the non-binary communities, in India, we don't even have enough data and research. So one of the first things that we're starting to do as AnitaB is to sort of figure out how can we get more data, more numbers, more research to start talking about these, and to start building that and crafting that narrative. So we've said non-binary only from October last year when I started. We had chosen to say only women in tech, but now we ensure that every aspect of what we do, we're including various other aspects of inclusion as well. And that's, people with disabilities. There are so many intersections, neurodivergence. So trying to sort of build this from a futuristic perspective of what would we like workplaces to look like? What would we want thriving workplaces to be? How would we want everybody to feel included and safe and belonged in some form? So that's the work that we do.
Great response. Thank you so much. And, when I was preparing for my conversation with you, I came across this term, which is the Grace Hopper celebration.
Yeah.
I don't know much about it, but do tell me a little bit about the Grace Hopper celebration and how has this influenced the careers of women in technology in India and the US?
So the Grace Hopper celebration in the US next year will be the 25th year. And this year for us here in India, it's going to be the 12th year. So we did have a hiatus. 2019, COVID happened, the company shut down. So we're literally reframing ourselves here in India. But the Grace Hopper celebration is a true celebration of the spirit of women and non-binary people that we represent. It happens on a large scale in the US, 30,000 people in person, job fairs, learning, networking, receptions. It's like one of those places where women just come and they feel like they own the space and belong in this space. And it's lovely to see that energy. And in India, this year, we're attempting to do half of that size, 15,000 people. It's happening at Bangalore in November 2021-22. We're trying to bring in aspects of celebration, of really learning, deep learning, tech and non-tech learning, various aspects of women and non-binary people's lives, whether it's their health, their mental health, their representation, all of those bits as well. We have a whole array of, we're collaborating with a trans-inclusive art collective called Aravani Art Project for art. We have an art nook. We're collaborating and building an entire book nook, which is going to have unconference sessions, reading, etc., happening from various books that we recommend. We have a short film festival, which is entirely for women and non-binary films, which are focused, written, or created by women and non-binary people. It's a small 80-seater, but we've partnered with Bangalore International Short Film Festival. We're trying to be as inclusive as we can. We have Assistive Technology Foundation that's helping us do closed captions and sign language interpreters and make the place really inclusive. We have an oasis of relax. The entire event is designed like a self-reflective journey. So it's not a conference booklet you get, it's actually a conference journal with vision boarding and with transformative reflective writing pieces and things like that to map your journey through the conference and the celebration. We have a Pride March on day 1. We have Usha Uthuprani Kohinoor performing on day 2. Now we have some stellar names of women and non-binary people and allies in tech coming and speaking. A whole bunch of partners already on board. So yeah, that's the Grace Hopper celebration, and we're trying to make it as much of a space of safety and of dialogue and of platforming and advocating for a lot of these changes that we want to see from an impact perspective, and also provide a platform for women and non-binary people to find work and advance their careers.
Well said. And I hope the entire celebration and the event goes off really well. But my next question for you, Shreya, is how can companies foster an inclusive culture that supports diversity?
We keep saying this. If you start with diversity, inclusion is very hard to attain. You have to start with inclusion first.
Okay.
Most organizations already have some form of diversity, and it's important to understand what that diversity look like.
Mhm.
It could be various intersections of religion, of upbringing, of regions, and all of that. So first is to understand the cultural landscape of where you're at as an organization. Two is to set the intention of what should diversity mean to us
Mm.
as an organization. Who are we? Why do we do the work we do? And how does diversity play a role in this kind of work and in the kind of the world that we're building, or the products or services that we're building to solve for certain problems out there in the world?
Mm.
How is it going to create the impact that we want to see? Now, once you articulate that, you arrive at sort of a certain cultural nuance of how you want that played out. And then comes the role of diversity, which is
Mm.
going to say, what are the gaps? How do we want to be? We need to build inclusive workplaces for diversity to thrive. It's not get the diversity in then and try and force fit it.
Yeah.
So it's always inclusion first.
Mm.
And when you start looking at that driving force as inclusion first, then you also layer it with purpose as a brand. Then you layer it with the larger ambit of who are we representing, who are we selling to, and
Mm.
all of those pieces then come into play.
Mm. Well said. And given the amount of knowledge you have on this subject, what role can male um, colleagues play in advancing gender diversity?
I think allyship is very, very important. We often realize that, we call them women's issues. They're not women's issues, they're
Correct.
societal issues. Because the way that this design works, everybody is in some form limited, and it is a detriment to everybody's progress if you're not building an inclusive world.
Mm.
And by that, I mean to say that I know so many people who sit out of these conversations because they're like, oh, it's a women's issue, but then it's becoming an echo chamber. And the
Mm.
problem is on both sides, right? A lot of times, a lot of women's events are focused on just having an internal dialogue. You've not brought in the allies. The world, if it needs equity, it needs to bring all of the voices together to, advocate for it, which does not exist right now. So what is needed to be done is to steer the conversation in a form and manner that we build allyship cohesively, and that we start sort of calling people in on
Mm.
various aspects of what does this look like. There's so much research to show why it's already a very problematic world. The biases that AI is picking up is such an instant sort of, it's right in your face right now. It's not something you can ignore. So
Mm.
unless we start taking the stance of changing the status quo for what it is, we're not going to be able to see how much of that needle we're able to move as we go further ahead.
Mm. Great response. Thank you. Can you give us an example of how successful policies or practices in certain organizations, and I don't want any names, of course, have actually improved gender diversity in tech?
For starters, to sort of start identifying what your hiring mechanisms are, to ensure that you equip people with gender neutral language to be able to do interviews and, get the best out of the candidates that you're interviewing, the ensuring it's the best person that gets the job, right? And that is including gender neutral resumes and it's interesting that AI has also started picking out men and women resumes look different, sound different.
Mm-hmm.
So I started showing the same bias that was there when human beings were intervening and doing the interview process to filter out resumes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the language of the way we even perceive what is shared with us. So one is, of course, awareness and education, and then policies that drive a lot more of a neutral culture. A lot of times the assumptions are made based on gender. It's also about unlearning that and saying it's a choice that we need to give the other person or extend to the other person.
Mm.
And allow them to make that choice for themselves, because oftentimes it's the biases that we have that are making those choices, preconceived assumptions that we seem to have. So it's a lot of education, awareness, and all of that, and a lot of leadership involvement. Until and unless the leaders walk the talk, until and unless, like, there is data to show that 90% of women have faced some form of sexual harassment. 100% of women have all faced some form of discrimination or workplace harassment. So there is a lot of leadership dialogue that needs to happen. And it's very subtle because it's conditioned, it's psychosomatic, and we're trying to override that with policy. It's
Mm.
actually, what's important is also self-work. It's
Correct.
also mindful leadership. It's also going inward to understand, what your space is in the world that you occupy and how do you play a role. So it's
Mm.
a lot of that kind of work. And it's exciting because we're rolling out like a leadership program, which is based on empathy and compassionate leadership and mindful leadership. And
Mm.
we're also doing a version of feminine authority, masculine authority, understanding what those look like and understanding that it's an archetype and it's a model that's available to you to access. It's not essentially, gendered, but it's as much of a spectrum as you'd like for it to be. And
Correct.
that extends into non-binary genders as well. So
Fascinating. Great response. And I've served on some very, very large global boards in the social sector. And in one particular board in Geneva, the chairperson just said, I will need diversity, and 1/3 of my board has to be women. And she just stuck to it. It There was a lot of anxiety, angst and so on. But 2 years later, 1/3 of the board was there. So my question to you, Shreya, is where does the accountability for diversity lie? And I often heard large company CEOs saying, "Oh, I formulated a policy. Now it's up to HR."
it's with leadership, it's with the product teams, it's with the consumer teams, it's with the
Mm.
sales teams.
Mm.
It's pervasive. Diversity is not a charter. Diversity is a culture. It's a
Mm.
way of life. It's a way of behavior. It's a way of, action.
Mm.
And that is not siloed. Diversity and inclusion is not a siloed responsibility that belongs to a certain DEI person on the team.
Mm.
It is how we talk to consumers. It is, what does our social media content look like? How are we speaking to customers? How are we speaking to disgruntled customers? How are we speaking about our colleagues? How are we talking about the person who sits next to me? How are we behaving with our peers? How is the leadership table? How much of comfort? So I have been on the other side. So I will share a personal anecdote. I am somebody who brings all of myself to work. And, I love dancing. I love a great party. I've had to tell my colleagues saying, if I danced on this table last night, I have equal requirement and equal capability to sit at the seat that I'm sitting on and still take the decisions. And they're
Mm.
both independent of each other and they're both the same person. And I
Mm.
have access to that range and I will make sure you accept that range. But sometimes you have to teach people how to treat you.
Mm.
And not a lot of people have, unfortunately, the ability, the wherewithal, the confidence, or even the platform to be able to do that.
Mm.
And it's a lot of very hard self-work. Again, I keep coming back to that because I think for organizations to really see the needle moving, it's working with mentors, it's working with organizations that understand the nuances of this, it's working with leadership teams, it's exposing ourselves to things and thoughts and ideas that are not comfortable. You have to sit with the discomfort of that, of the role that we all play.
Mm.
The trope of not all men, understanding why it is everybody and why patriarchy is as much resourced in by women as there are men. It's about understanding so much of the societal nuances, the
Mm.
cultural constructs of the spaces that we're in,
Mm.
and that comes into the boardroom along with that and really working with that and on it together.
Mm. Well said. One more question relating to diversity, and then I've got one or two general questions for you.
Mhm.
Shreya, we are in a country with the startup scene has become very, very big and attractive. How can startups and smaller companies implement effective diversity and inclusion practices?
I say that diversity and inclusion practices are intentional. You have to set your intention because I know for a fact that so many women founders don't get as much access to capital as their male counterparts
Yeah.
do.
Mm.
Right? There's so many of these. So it's important to know the landscape of the spaces that you're working in.
Mm.
Two, it's also important to understand how are you going to access the talent that's going to take you from 0 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 500. And somewhere in that journey, you'll recognize that diversity is a very important aspect of that scale.
Yeah.
Diversity plays a very important role when it comes to scaling of organizations, especially startup cultures. because the kind of energy and enthusiasm that a diverse team brings in
Mm-hmm.
is that much more. But the problem lies in the fact that homogeneous teams often tend to have a lot more confidence about outcomes than heterogeneous teams. So this was an entire research that was done in Oxford, right? She
Mm-hmm.
worked with organizations over, I think, 25 years. And the research shows that homogeneous teams have only 60% propensity of achieving objectives, but they have 80% confidence on how they'll achieve the objectives. Whereas heterogeneous teams have 80+% of achieving what they set out to achieve, but their confidence is as low as 40%. They're not confident about the outcome,
Yeah.
which is a reflection of why startups and organizations, etc., function the way they do, because there is comfort in that camaraderie of the room looking similar to me. The minute you bring in differences, what you're not recognizing is that conflict that it brings, that intersections of identities and people and thoughts that come in are going to that much more help you scale up as an organization. So it has to be driven intentionally. Hiring has to be intentional. Think of markets differently. How you understand your competitor landscape differently. Sort of step outside of the usual comfort boxes, and there are processes in which these can be done. So we do something called the discovery. So you can do discovery just like you would do brand discovery. You can do diversity discovery. Understand that. So there's an entire process to it. And I think startups applying that will really help them scale faster.
Thank you. So now time for two more questions, and these two questions are for Shreya personally.
Yeah.
Shreya, you won the Miss Universal Empowerment 2024 and Mrs. India Universe in 2017.
Yeah.
How did this impact you, your work, and your advocacy?
I think when I did the Mrs. India thing, it was just a one-off thing. I found it very amusing myself. Even now, when I look back at both of these platforms, I didn't fit in because I didn't look like one of them. I didn't talk like one of them. These are all women who've been groomed to be in pageants, and there's a certain aura that they carry, and I probably look like their photographer or their event manager, or I didn't look like or behave like one of them. But what I did realize was there are things that connect us as humans. There were some really kind people, very nice, very all of that. But there was so much body image issues. Can you imagine on platforms like these also women who are unhappy with their bodies and with themselves? And it gave me a lot of reflective thought on authenticity, on being real. Like I stuck to this avatar of me. I didn't try to be somebody else. And I think authenticity pays off always, and honesty pays off always. I just showed up as myself, and to me, I was like, I was going to have a great time and just do that. And I think that just led to this happening, right? So when I look back at both of these experiences, I look at them as ways for me to be able to access very different sets of women, speak what I think of in these nuances and constructs as into new audiences, like, go into the belly of the cave of the tiger to sort of change the nuance of what beauty looks like by going into the pageant and saying, let's break the stereotypes. Wasn't by design, it just happened by both nature and nurture, I guess. So
amazing. And my last question to you, and I want to come to your book. You've written a co-authored a book, which is Words Matter, the language that girls need to speak. Tell me a little bit about the book. What was your inspiration to write it, and what was the hypothesis?
So the idea that words mean different things to different genders, we were coming very face to face with it, especially when we started working with young girl children in not so privileged backgrounds. We started recognizing how even things like dreams, mean different things to different people. And when we look at gender, words like ambition, an ambitious man and an ambitious woman, you see the dichotomy of what is celebrated versus what is not. What does shame mean to a woman versus what is shaming for a man? What does guilt mean to women versus what does guilt mean for a man? All these words, language is inherently biased. You need to consciously rewire that in our own heads to be able to overcome those biases. The premise of the book was that Jacinta and I had worked already in the space of DEI for, I think, about 7 or 8 years, which is when we sat down and we said we should call these out for what they are. So the book is actually just a compilation of 40 words that are speaking to the reader.
Mhm.
saying, I mean different things to you. And if you're a man, then this is what I mean to you.
Yeah.
If you're a woman, this is what I mean
Mm.
to you. And to really neutralize that. So it's a book that talks about the importance of confidence and why it should mean the same thing and asking questions. And
Mm.
so it's about that. So that's the book.
And on that note, Shreya, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. I think we had an incredible conversation about gender diversity and inclusion, and I really agree with what you said on how important it is to bring inclusion before we start talking of diversity. Point well, very well made and understood, certainly by me, and I hope my audience have understood it also. I learned many new things. For example, the Grace Hopper celebration, and I know you said you got a big event coming up in November. Good luck with that. Thank you also for talking to me about how some of the events that you won in 2027, in 2017 and 2024, how that impacted you. And also thank you for talking to me about your book. Thank you again and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. What a lovely conversation it was. Looking
Thank
forward to many, many more. And
Thank,
I'm going to be an ardent, avid follower of everything that you put up going forward. So thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.